So welcome, Jo.
Thank you, Mandy, and thank you for everybody for coming this morning, because it's really sunny outside, so I thought everybody will be wanting to be in the garden or having a walk. But I'm going to show you lots of photographs of the places that I've walked anyway. And, you know, talking about this book, it's been quite a roller coaster ride for me, because I didn't actually expect to ever be writing a book. I mean, I do write blogs and I write herbal medicine blogs and I do bits of things on my WordPress site, but up to a couple of years ago I didn't have any plans of writing a book at all. I was actually painting all the hill forts, got Caer Caradoc up behind me over there, and I was talking to a friend about this and my love of hill forts, and she said, why don't you do a set of cards, a set of oracle cards about the Shropshire hill forts? Well, at the time, I kind of just said, oh, yes, that's an exciting idea. But I didn't really know how to use oracle cards, if I'm honest, at that point. And so I said yes, but off I went researching the hill forts. And the next thing I knew, I was actually writing this book. It dictated that was how the journey was going to go. And my love of hill forts started really back as a small child, not in Shropshire at all. The reason it's called Finding Home, because it was very much for me about linking myself into this landscape in Shropshire. And I'm going to take you now, I hope, to a screen share. Ooh, technical. It's gone again. Where's it gone? There we go. I think it's there. So let's get there. It worked before, but it might not work now. Is it going to work? Can you see it? Can you see? We had this problem, didn't we? And I managed to get it all working before, and now it seems to have disappeared on me again. I don't know why. Hang on a minute.
No, we've gone back to that white screen.
Oh, we'd practiced all this.
Oh
no. Stop share. Right, I'll try again. Share. Got it? Got anything now?
Yay, that's it. Yeah.
All right, all good. I was having a little bit of a nightmare. I'm going to now press it on to play. So hopefully, have you got it full now? Is it there? Yay, great. Okay, so this is where it all started, up in Derbyshire, on the edges of the Peak District where I grew up. And I'm going to read you the opening of my book, just to set the scene. I'm 16 and standing on the top of Mount Tor. Gale force winds blast me in the face and my cheap orange cagoule is severely challenged by this amount of weather. My hair is drenched now. The ends are freezing into icicles and slapping my cheeks. I can make out the dark, familiar peaks of Kinderscout behind and the twinkling lights of Castleton in the valley below. I hunker down in the earthworks and feel at home on this hill, grounded and calm, despite the weather's attempts to move me on. I've been here many times, more times than I can count, and I will be here again, of that I'm certain. I'm drawn here by something I cannot quite name, and this is my beginning. And so this place, Mount Tor, that you can see, and there's the shaly eastern face of it that's just above Castleton, was the place that, despite wherever I lived, I kept coming back to. I went, when I first started teaching, to live just on the edge of the Yorkshire Dales, and I took children out walking in Ingleborough and the hill forts of the Dales, and I went to live in the Lake District and got to know all the hill forts and mountains and wonderful standing stones up there. But there was something still about this, you know, this formative place of home. So when I found myself living in Shropshire, moving down to Shropshire, the first place I went was here, which is Caer Caradoc in the sunset. And I love Caer Caradoc. There it is again from the Lawley with the long min behind. It's such a wonderful story about the whole thing with Caractacus fighting off the last stand against the Romans. And I used to go into primary schools when I was teaching here and tell that story and get the children to reenact the ending. You know, was he really spared in Rome, or was he killed anyway? Did he escape and come back to Britain and lead another force? You know, that idea that people were standing up for their landscape against an invader really kind of captured theirs and mine imagination. And here's another view of Caradot with the Lawley, and in the distance you can just see the pimple, the peak of the Wrekin. You can see it again from the top of the Lawley. And this idea of the tribal capital, the Canovii, you know, standing on top of the hills and looking out. When you go to these places and you look out and you see the landscape around you, it absolutely filled me with a sense of belonging. And that's really what I was trying to find when I wrote this book. Because despite having lived in Shropshire longer than I've lived anywhere else, I still had this real pull to go back to the north. And I was exploring that conflict really within me about not being from this county, but wanting to feel my sense of belonging and family to it. And for me, it came actually through following the story of the Iron Age tribe. And looking at the Wrekin in the distance, I call it the little Kilimanjaro of Shropshire. You know, it's on its own. This is a view now out from the Wrekin looking back towards the Long Mynd. But it just stands there on its own. And it's that idea that from the top, you can see the rest of the tribal hill forts and they can see you. And that idea that when you're on the top, this is a beautiful sunset that I was lucky enough to get just before Christmas. With this nice picture of the hat on the top. I just felt, you know, what would that have been like for people to see the place on fire, to actually see, you know, everything around, and you're looking and you're signaling at night and you're seeing the fires, and then you suddenly see your capital burning. And I really felt for the Canovii actually at that point, and I felt that sense of loss actually. And there's two Caradocs in Shropshire. There's one in Church Stretton and there's the other one out at Chapel Lawn, and that has a really poignant atmosphere. And while I was there, I wrote a poem to the tribes really, which I'm also going to share with you now. A lot of these words and songs and poems and the writing of the book felt to me like it was coming directly from walking on the land, from actually being out in these places and having that relationship and opening yourself up to a connection. And that's really what I was trying to convey in the book. So this is a poem that I wrote to the Canovii. You came here and settled, shaped the land, cut down trees, sculpted the mountain tops and made a home. Dug all defences, built up ramparts, layer upon layer till satisfied it was enough. And then time to gaze out across the land and admire those views. This rich, dear landscape of deer-filled forests and myriad connections, wood for fuel and huts and crafting. You kept cattle, honoured the horn god, worshipped the streams and stars and sacred groves, leaving behind the standing stones and furrowed trackways for all to see. Life was good and the tribe grew, traded and flourished on these Shropshire hills. Look around you, how far you've come, how many now? Fires are lit, dots on the horizon, signalling to neighbours on nearby hills, sharing food, sharing wealth, sharing time, sharing life. Look into the fires now, the legions are on their way. And I felt really that sense of chill of the end of that way of life, you know, and the end of that tribal times when the Romans came and enforced that rule, and then Christianity came, and we lost that connection with the landscape in the way that people had that in the past. And you know, when I started researching how many actual hill forts there were, just going to try and have a look at the chat. I don't think I can actually. No, my mouse doesn't work while it's on a slideshow, so I'll have to come back to that. I found actually nearly 77 Iron Age settlements in Shropshire. There were only about 50 hill forts that you could actually visit, and many of them were on private land, many of them were under buildings or roads or even a gravel pit in the case of some. But it took me all over the county to places that I hadn't actually explored until this point of writing the book. The thing that I found with before I was doing this project, I think, like a lot of people, I went to the same places. I went to Caradoc, I went to the Brown Clee. There it is from Wenlock Edge, the way I see it every day when I'm walking. I went to Nordy Bank because my friend Lucy lives just under it, and I go up there a lot. I went to Buried Ditches at Clun because I love the Green Man Festival, and it's one of those fantastic hill forts with wonderful ramparts. So it was easy to imagine, you know, people living there. But actually, I started to discover lots of different places. But the funny thing that I had this experience with the Titterstone Clee is that's the Titterstone from Nordy Bank. I didn't actually want to go to the Titterstone Clee for a long time. It was one of those places there. I thought, you know, oh, there's all this mining, there's all the golf ball, there's a radar on there. It's going to not have an atmosphere. It's not going to feel right for me. And the first time I ended up going, I just thought, wow, but look at the views. And this was the day that I went there with these amazing cloud formations looking out onto the county. And I was just blown away by it. And then I came and I found this bit, you know, the hollowed out center. And it was a bit like a visceral punch when I first went there. And it reminded me of my family history, which is very much in the mining industry. My grandparents, uncles, great grandparents were all working down the pit. And when I came up onto the Clee, even though it's quarrying from the surface, it had that industrial feel and that reminder for me of the stories that I'd heard of my grandparents going down the pits at 9 and coming out in the war and Second World War and the Sheffield Blitz and seeing the whole landscape devastated. So I had a real personal connection to this place. But then I kind of walked around a little bit more and looked over back to the Clee, back to the Wrekin, walked around with Suzanne, talked about some of the stories, had some songs that were given to me as I was walking around this place. And I felt this real sense of connection. And that's what happened each time I went somewhere. Somebody said to me, it's a bit like, you know, I call it archaeology of the soul, because a lot of the quotes that I had from other authors referred to the soul and the pilgrimage and how, you know, digging into these landscapes was not just about the landscape, it was about the soul. It wasn't just the soul of the people that had lived there and the soul of the animals that lived there. It was about my soul. It was almost like my stories. It became almost like an autobiography through Hill Forts. And here we are on the top of Linley Hill, which is just, if you've been there, it's just behind the back of the Longmynd, looking at the edge of the Stiper Stones, and then you've got this fantastic view out towards Corndon Hill and over where Mitchell Fold is, which is one of my favourite places in Shropshire. But the thing about the day that we went to Linley Hill was that it was one of the most memorable walks of my life, actually. I mean that, absolutely. I mean, I've been really lucky in my life to do a lot of high altitude treks, charity treks all over the world for Parkinson's and Marie Curie. I've walked and mountain walked from being little. But this day that we went on Linley Hill was just one of the most magical days I'll always remember. And it's that connection to the senses and to the feeling that you get when you're out on a really cold winter's day that's bright and sunny. And I'd like to just read you the little bit about that. That day was the coldest of the year so far. So cold, in fact, that our heating had broken down the night before, and we'd resorted to hot water bottles and extra clothing. But still the sun was shining and Linley Camp was calling. Walking up the farm track from Norbury, the ground was frozen solid underfoot. Higher up on the hill, snowdrifts had blown into deep piles against the fence, catching Hollydog out with the sun sinking up to her waist. The wind was biting into us and taking the temperature down into minus figures. All around, the sun and clouds and hills and snow were competing for the most attention. It was almost too much to bear, too much beauty. The sheer glory of it all made me overwhelmed, grateful and awestruck all at once. I've been lucky enough to have walked in many places around the world, but that day, in that place, on that walk, was easily one of the very best of all. And the photographs that I got as the sun was going down from there were quite astonishing. But this picture here is one of my favourite pictures that I've ever taken. And it was just looking up into one of the beaches, and this icicle was just frozen down where the water had run through the crown of the tree and formed this icicle, which was pointing, you can't see on here because I've had to crop it to go on a slideshow, but directly down onto the top of Corndon Hill behind. And it's in my Hill Fort book, along with lots of other photographs from the walks. And here we are as the sun was going down with the two trees that I just felt looked like figures standing there with this stone that looks like a pyramid behind it. And the very many photographed Linley beaches, which are just beautiful as you come along the crest of that hill. So trees, I mean, I love trees. I think a lot of people love trees. And the funny thing is about a lot of these hill forts is that they're actually shrouded in trees, they're hidden. And I ended up finding quite a lot of tree-filled hill forts that I didn't know were there. And this is one of them. And I actually didn't want to share this. I was almost, do I put it in the book? I was like, oh, I'm going to have to ask the land if it's allowing me to share this, because I really felt a sense of kind of personal responsibility that if I expose some of these places to public to go around, you know, trekking around the Shropshire Hills with this book, could I then be responsible for damaging the piece of them in some way? And so this particular place and Burrow Hill Camp at Clunulford were two of the places that I really hesitated to share, but I am going to share them with you. I did get permission from the land. I asked nicely and it said yes. And this place was hidden right in the middle of a Forestry Commission plantation, which when on first sight, as we walked around, it seemed like it was desolate. We ended up having a picnic on this stump thinking, there's nothing here, there's nothing here. And then suddenly I kind of had this sense to this, it sounds a bit mysterious, but I had this feeling that I just needed to go off the track and go a little bit further into the woods. And I followed that instinct and it took me into a circle. And the minute I went into the circle, the atmosphere changed and you could just make out that this is the outer ridge of a bivalent hill fort, which is really tiny and circular, right in the middle of this dense plantation of conifers. And in the centre of it was this tree. And there were 13 oak trees on this hill. And this was in the centre. And it's an oak tree, not like the oak trees that you think of that are huge and broad and tall and strong. It's a spindly, moss-covered, arboreal kind of place. But it had been decorated out with baubles and offerings, of which I added to it. And it felt like this magical, magical place. And I wrote about it at length in the book, but what I want to read and share with you now is actually not my words. It's my husband Andy's from his poetry book, Pan's Footprints. And it's his poem, because I took him with me to this one, in relation to this place at Radnor Wood. And it's called Grove. Is this where it had all been leading? The reason for all these ruminations and peregrinations? To be here in bright December morning, awestruck, speechless and rooted. Seconds ago, we picked our way through ankle-biting dead wood, searching a forgotten hill fort in a scrappy planted woodland. A place of history ploughed out, home reduced to crop. You remarked there was no birdsong. We resigned ourselves to absence, consoled ourselves with sandwiches consumed on a stump, when all at once and without warning, we step into another place. The air itself alters. We are bathed in radiant light. Arboreal fingers rise from the earth, cup us in a familial native embrace. 13 ancient oak trees surround us, each of them a twisted hand of lichen dripping branches, reaching out to touch neighbour in sacred circle. Centre of this guardian host stands Lord Oak, imperious, implacable, gnarled limbs draped with silver baubles, trinkets and offerings, evidence of appropriate attention. And I hear myself laughing, and I laugh and I laugh and I laugh. I laugh at the timidity of hope in the face of such certainty. I laugh knowing my place, the reason we are here. All we have to do now is move our bodies, raise our voices, celebrate the singular beauty of our damp and splendid world. And I'm going to go from Radnor Wood to the hill fort that's actually closest to me, where I live in Wenlock. This is the Mog at East Hope, or Lord and Ditches as it's also called, but locals call it the Mog, and that's what it is to me. So we're coming up from the side near East Hope here, and we're going to go through the plantation. And looking back, there was the Wrekin with a beautiful rainbow over it the last time I went, with Suzanne, I think. That was that day, wasn't it? Oh, yeah. And here we are looking towards the Brown Clee, just coming around the edge. And the thing about the Mog is that it's really overgrown with trees. You know, the first few times, I had to go there a few times to get a connection to this place. Long time ago, when we first moved to Shropshire, about 25 years ago, and then again, about 15 years ago with an old friend that lived in East Hope, the late artist Sheila Jevons, and then several times back with my dog and with Andy or with friends. But the time that really did it for me was this time when I found these two. And this is two beech trees that are joined. They've got two limbs that are joined and growing into each other perfectly. So they share the same nutrients, they share the same water supply, they share the same fungal alert system, and they have this magical presence that's looking up between the beech trees. And for me, they're the guardians. They're the guardians of the Mog. And I was lucky enough when I went there once to find some branches that had fallen off this during a storm, and I took them away and made some drum beater handles with them, because I like to recycle and reuse wood that I find that's been flayed or chopped or just given from a storm. And that was the two beaches up at the Mog at East Hope, which are well worth a visit, as well as going and finding the actual landscape itself. And I'm going to take you out of the trees and out of the cover now to somewhere that's really, really battered and exposed. And this is looking out back towards the Brown Clee in the distance and the back of the Long Bind. And you can see the Wrekin from up here, and you can see the Titterstone Clee as well. And we're actually out right on the edge of the Clun forest, and you're above Fron, Newcastle on Fron, and Clun, and you're looking from Cairndin Ring. And Cairndin Ring's a sort of place that it's wild and exposed. You feel like you're in another time when you're up here. It's just a single univalent hill fort, if you want to give it a technical term. But it was thought of that this was actually a corral, a kind of animal corral, a trading post, because it's really close to what would have been the Kerry Ridgeway and Portway trading routes, where they used to trade Neolithic times with flint axes as well, but actually cattle trading routes into Bishop's Castle. And it's wild and exposed up there. And whilst we went there, this was greeting us along the rampart. And I'm going to read you my first impressions of Cairndon Ring. Up above Newcastle-on-Clun, winding around the site of the once ancient Clun Forest, high up on moorland plateaus, windy and unforgiving, sits Cairndon Ring. Lacking the protection of steep-sided or multi-ditch defences, this site literally blows you away and its sense of place feels breathtaking. The view from above doesn't in any way come close to how it feels as you approach from the High Sheep Road, or prepare you for the powerful feeling evoked in your gut on entering its embankment. The wild elements of wind and rain render it cold and vital out here. It's a bit like the difference between looking at a food recipe and tasting it. It looks enticing and you think you know what to expect when you've made it, but the senses are not involved in the process of looking, and without the smell or taste, it's not alive to you. Being on Cairndon Ring leaves your senses attacked and battered by its absolute exposure. Trees cling on desperately, contorted by the wind. Strands of wool grow across the grass, whipped up from the slight hollows where sheep have attempted to find shelter. The sky was ominous that day with heavy, threatening clouds. One theory is that this place was for livestock, like a huge high corral. And as if to confirm this, sheep eyed us suspiciously as we arrived. And there in the centre, glaring at us even more eerily, was a sheep's skull, hollow, white and washful, an ancient guardian staring out through time in ghostly quiet. And there's the sheep's skull. It was really actually very eerie, but the sky was that colour. I mean, it was really, clouds were coming in and storms were coming in. And from there, we drove on to look at Upper and Lower Shoreditch, which is a sort of cross dike against the Kerry Ridgeway. And, you know, it just felt like I'd stepped into another time. You know, it was the most bizarre day. The mist had come down, the rain had come down. There were Highland cattle looking, you know, horned just like they would have been for the Canovii, and the whole thing about cattle in that time and the importance of cattle, and seeing them walking out of the mist along this landscape that felt so unchanged, despite the thousands of years since it was shaped by the first settlers here, was just a really atmospheric and privileged experience, really, to be in that landscape and to have it all to yourself. That's the other wonderful thing about Shropshire. You go out into the land and you get the place very much to yourself, and it feels like, you know, you have the quiet of the animals around you and the experiences and the opportunity to really breathe into the place that you're visiting. So this next place that I've got here is I talk a lot in the book about the animal encounters. I mean, animal encounters for me are always a magical thing. If I see a deer and if I see a hare or a fox, you know, I'm absolutely overjoyed. I just love that precious time of staring into the eyes of a wild animal and having that experience with them. And I had that on a lot of these places, but this place that we're at now was one of my little magical encounters as well that I want to share with you. And this is Cawes Castle, and it's a place that I hadn't ever been to before. I didn't know about. Again, when I was doing this research, I found a lot of new places, and the Rearbrook Valley was somewhere that I didn't really know. And most of the hill forts along the Rearbrook Valley, so there's Cawes Castle, there's Callow Hill Fort as well, there's the back of Gorsty Bank, there's Wilmington Castle. They all got taken over as Norman Motte and Bailey castles, showing the importance of guarding that route later on through history of borders and boundaries between England and Wales at that point. But this place in Cawes Castle, here's the ramparts as you're coming in, and has a trackway between it. It was a really windy day. The storm was coming in. I could see the rain coming over Corndon Hill. Everywhere else on the south side was in rain. On the north side was in sun, and I knew it was coming towards me. But it was so windy, but I just got into this place where it was really peaceful and quiet. And I heard this rustle, I heard this noise, felt this sense of being watched. And I turned round and a hare was very close to me, really unperturbed by my presence, as curious at me as I was to see her, really. And it was just, for me, Cawes Castle is hares. So here we go. Cawes Castle is a wonderfully evocative place. It made me think about its relationship in the landscape to other sites. Nesscliffe was visible through the trees, a connection to the northern forts. And obviously the relationship with the Ponsbury gang and Corndon was clear too, and the Brydens behind. But it was the long mountain that claimed the place. It belonged to that set, guarding the route along the Rearbrook Valley between Shrewsbury to Montgomery. I was so glad I made the effort that day to go alone and explore the place. But best of all was my meeting with the hare, a curious and unexpected encounter, with her not in a field where I usually watch them, but guarding the remains of an old Iron Age hill fort. It felt like the deer sentinels on Burrow Hill, and for a moment it had seemed that all there was left in the world was me, the hare, and the noise of the wind moving the trees above, with the sound of the timber straining and flexing, rubbing against each other, bark on bark. The noise of the cars, the heavy tractor, the plain above, the glint of metal industrial chicken sheds and corrugated barn roofs below had all fallen away, leaving me alone in another realm, eye to eye with the hare, for what had seemed like an age. So here's to you, magical leaper, shapeshifter, grass-bounder, fidgety-footed one, earth-sitter, herb cropper, dew-hopper, long-legged jack, swift as the wind, cat of the woods. Right. And here we've got some more of the animals that were along the journey, and it's the Longmin ponies. So I'm looking back over towards the Shropshire Hills. This picture is actually on the back inside cover of the book. The photographs in the book are all in black and white. I kind of made that stylistic choice, although I did the artwork from the front from a gel plate print that I'd done of the Wrekin. But when I did the slideshow talk for people a few weeks ago in the Priory Hall, I wanted to show them the photographs in colour. I'm just going to share a couple more, and then I'm thinking I'll have a look at the chat and have some time, hopefully, for some questions if we're all right for time. A lot of these places have stories and legends attached to them. And when I was out walking on Walton Hill, which is down the Rearbrook Valley, which is another interesting place to visit, and again, it's in the book, I met a couple that had been to Coxall Null. Coxall Null near Bucknell was one of those places that I struggled to get to. I had to have 3 goes to get there. One time, the roads were closed. Then it was COVID lockdown. You couldn't go anywhere. Then there was a tree fella tractor thing in the way, and there was nowhere to park. And so finally, we ended up going in spring, which was great, actually, because it was a beautiful day. Lots of spring lambs, lots of buzzards flying above, and a red kite. But they talked to me about this thing called the frogstone. And this is what the photograph is. And you can see it's kind of this glacial stone with grooves on it, natural grooves on it, actually. And it's covered in moss, so it looks green, and it's shaped like a frog. And the legend of the frogstone is that it moves around. It moves around every night. And so it's never in the same place. And so when you go, you have to look for the frogstone. And I have to say, it took a bit of finding. I do tell you where it is in the book, but I'll be interested next time I go to see if it's moved. So there's the frogstone at Coxall Null, which is another amazing site, and potentially could be the place of the last battle of Caradoc. Depending on which history book you read, it could be Caer Caradoc, it could be Chapel Lawn Caradoc, it could be Coxall Knoll, or it could be Clonminic, it could, you know, every historian has a different theory for that story, but the story still remains of them fighting for their lives and for their way of life. And the other thing that I wanted to share about Coxall Knoll was this photograph of a tree, and the way that the leaf on the right hand side is resting on the horizon of the cornfield behind, to me looked like a dragon. Sorry, not a dragon, a giant striding across. There's lots of giant stories in Shropshire. So this is my giant of Coxall Knoll striding across the landscape to go up the hill. So I think we need to make a new giant story for Coxall Knoll. And just another photograph now from the top of Chapel Lawn Caradoc, which was just another wonderful place where I wrote a song, which I'm not going to sing for you now, but I will be singing the songs and doing the stories in some things later on in the year with some friends as well. And the the Chapel Lawn Caer Caradoc, the ditches, the ramparts were so steep that I had this feeling that they were almost like microclimates in their own right. That even though that they were defensive, I kind of had this idea that they would have maybe stored or grown or sat in them for protection from the wind. And we sat under this beautiful hawthorn tree for lunch that day. And I'm just going to come off the slideshow now. Yeah, there we go. So I can have a look at the chat box and see what that question was. Yes, the Lonely Mountain. It is a bit like the Lonely Mountain, Mike, because it's that thing about the reeking being on its own, which is why I call it the Kilimanjaro of Shropshire, because it makes me feel like, you know, it's this little place that's on its own. Can you still see my screen? Have I got rid of the slideshow or not? No. Yes, I have. Right. No, I haven't. So I need to stop share. I'll stop that share. Yay. So I can come back into the group, because I'm aware that I've talked for a long time and I'd like to have an opportunity if anybody's got any questions or anything they'd like to add and share about their feelings about some of these wonderful hill forts, which we are so lucky to have so many of in Shropshire. So I'll think you're getting, so you're unmuted, and maybe if anybody has got a question. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I think I'd like to say it rather than type it, because if I type it, I might make a typo and change the sense completely. Jo, I just think it's absolutely the time for this sort of work, because we need to be able to find words and platforms and a discourse to describe this connection with the land, because we've become so disconnected. And I'm just really inspired by you that you're finding a platform, words, ways of discussing this medicine that exists around us and elevating it and bringing it to everybody's attention. And I just really thank you for all that work. You know, I love bloggers. Suzanne writes a blog as well. And, you know, people framing this stuff, we've never needed it more than we do as we recover culturally and physically from these awful times that we've lived through. Thank you.
Thank you, Sal. And it absolutely felt for me, if I'm honest, it felt like I was guided to do this as an act of service. You know, however you want to interpret that, I felt like I had to do this work. I went out onto the land and I had a relationship with the landscape that moved me to such an extent that I had to do the work, I had to do the writing. And that's why I started off at the beginning by saying, you know, I didn't actually intend to write a book. I mean, I've written a lot of poetry, I've written a lot of nature blogs about my walks on my WordPress site, herbal medicine blogs. I didn't know what I was embarking on. I mean, in some ways, I'm glad I didn't, because it was really hard work to go through the whole printing, publishing, you know, stress of that. But I didn't feel like I was doing it for me. I felt that I had to do this as an honouring of this incredible landscape that we live in, this beautiful world that is so ignored and not seen by so many people because of the way of life that we have now and the way that we live. And I really felt this sense of connection and duty to share my emotional connection, you know. And it was an emotional connection, and I know that Kate Innes said, you know, she said, it's a tender and passionate exploration, and it's intensely personal, you know, and very open. And I thought, oh, is it? And she said it's, you know, with disarming honesty and joy. And I'm thinking, oh, is she talking about my book? But I guess I felt like there wasn't a filter. And I thought a lot about, when I finished writing the book, the idea of putting out into the world, you know, of actually revealing myself. I've been a teacher all my life. I've taught in some way. I've had to perform. I've had to be in a role. We're in roles in life, you know. We're daughters, we're friends, we're sisters, we're mothers, we're wives, we're teachers, we're workers, you know. We're all these roles that we put on. But for me, this book was not written for, in some ways, for people. It was written to the landscape, it was written to the natural world, it was written to the ancestors. And I felt like I'd exposed myself completely in a naked way, in a way that I've never done before. And it was scary to do that, but I felt that I had to, because the landscape needed us. The Hill Forts needed us, the voices of the people that have before needed us, and the songs that came to me had to be sung. I am going to sing something. I'm just going to sing a very quick thing, because, and I can't believe I'm doing this, because I am always a bit scared of singing. But when I'd finished printing this book, I'd sent it off to the printer. I'd got it all ready to go, and I went up the Caradoc again, because I always go up the Caradoc a lot. And I was walking around by the cave, and this little verse came to me, and then I had to put it right at the very beginning of the book. And this was a song for Caradoc. It was for Caradoc, and it goes a little bit like that. It goes like this: do you know my story? Do you know my name? I'll tell you of my lifetime, tell you of my fame. Time has passed, the tribes are gone, but my voice still lingers on. In the ground you tread upon, that's where you can find me. And that was all it was. That was a very short song, but it was that thing that their voices are there, and the atmosphere and the presence of people on this landscape through all these times in history, making a home here. And we're still walking the same paths. We're still looking out on the same landscape. And we need to protect and respect this place that's so beautiful, this world that we have. And all the songs that came, I mean, that I will put some out on the Library to Lane website eventually. But you know, they needed to be told, and I wanted to share them, not for me, but for everybody, to encourage them to feel a sense of connection to place, and to develop a responsibility and a love of the land. And that's really the motivation for all of it. Yeah.
Something's really come into my mind as you've been talking, which is, you know, you're talking a lot about your feeling of vulnerability, you know, that thing you were exposed, I'm not comfortable singing, blah, blah, blah. You know, you've really offered your vulnerability to interpret these places which were places of strength and battle and fortification. It's a delicious kind of juxtaposition, really, of strength and vulnerability. And it's what we need in these times. People are over strong and forget their tenderness. And I think that, you know, work like you're offering shows us that way. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Anybody else got any questions or anything they'd like to add? Hi, Suzanne.
Hello. You mentioned at the beginning the artworks that you did before, that you carried behind you and stuff. Will you be doing an exhibition of those at some point?
Oh, yes, that would be nice, wouldn't it? I have got a lot of paintings in my house of Hill Forts in one form or another, whether they're oils or collagraphs or gel plate prints. Yeah, it would be nice, wouldn't it? That was my idea, actually, initially, was that I would do a series of paintings, all of the Shropshire Hill Forts. And then I realized there were 77 potential sites, and I thought, oh God, I'll be dead by the time I finished painting them all. You know, it was going to take me too long, and that was part of the problem that I had with the Oracle card set, because I thought, well, how do I do it? And what I've done at the moment with that, because it is something I am going to do, because it was again a promise. It was a promise, you know, of another way of linking people into the land. I've selected 30 that I'm going to do images for, and when they are done, yeah, it would be nice to actually have an exhibition of that work, and actually then I'd really like to sing the song about the Clee Hill and the song about Chapel Lawn, which songs about trees and hares and all these things that I like to sing, but I sing around campfires, I sing in front of friends, but the idea of singing in front of an audience is again, it was facing my fears. You know, if you're going to do it, why not do it? And when are you going to do it? If not now, when? You know, I'm getting too old to say no. So I think, yeah, maybe I'll do that exhibition, and maybe I'll do some songs. And there seems to me, with this connection to the land, that there's so much more to be done, because as soon as I finished writing this book, I started writing another. So the first book was called Finding Home, Finding Home, Journeys with the Hill Forts of Shropshire. And the second one is actually Finding Beauty in an Ordinary Place, and it's a year of nature on your doorstep. So it's just walking from your house and seeing what is out there. So you're not getting in a car. And that was partly influenced by what was happening in lockdown, and really getting to know the place that is there, dog poo, warts and all, because actually we live in quite a lovely place in Wenlock, but it's not, without its unglamorous bits. It's not without its down to earth nitty gritty bits. And actually there's still weeds creeping up in the pavement, there's still trees growing by the side of the road wherever you go in a city, in a town. And I grew up right on the outskirts of the city of Sheffield, so I consider myself to be urban, really, but I played out in the landscape and in the countryside all the time, and I feel that there's so much more to say about that connection to nature, of what's on your doorstep. So yeah. I've just seen something in the chat box. Yeah, I was singing in the George, where we used to do folk night, didn't we? And that was great. And I like doing that kind of singing, but singing on a screen and having it recorded is a different thing altogether. Yeah. How are we doing for time? Any more questions? Anything else anybody would like to ask? I can rabbit on forever, so you just need to stop me, really. Mandy, have you got any questions? Or
Well, I was just going to say that we can only do an hour's recording. So,
Yeah. So we're
yeah,
coming
any
up to
last minute
time.
questions, just get them in now.
Hi,
Suzanne.
Yeah. Can I just say that you know, the book, I read a little bit, not each night but every other night, and it's like I don't read a whole chapter because it's like I'm going up the hill with you and visiting a place and absorbing that place, because your words are so, there's the whole book and the music that goes along with it, and the songs and the poetry and the artworks and the photographs. It's a multi-sensory project. It's not just a book of words. I mean, you said at the beginning it's not a guidebook, but it's like a journeying book. You know, you right, you know, right, and now we're going to go to so and so. It's a, you take the words, you show, not tell, if that's the way the writers do it. You start reading and you're on that path walking up. So you know, if you haven't got the book, I just want to say get a copy, because you know, if you are stuck in through, you know, a disability or lockdown or, you know, isolation, you can leave your house with this book. You will be on a hill fort, you will be feeling that rain stinging on your face, and feeling the wind blowing the trees and hearing the creaking of the timbers and all that, because it is just so amazingly written.
Oh, thank you.
There you go.
Thank you, Suzanne. And yeah, I mean, I really did want to take people out. You know, I started writing blogs during lockdown and people said, you know, they felt they were walking with me, and that was the whole point. And I think if I've got time, I'm going to read you a little quick poem of a place to take you, and will just take us up to time, if that's okay. Is that all right, Mandy? I think that should do it. And I wrote this poem literally last week about a place that I go to in my mind a lot. There's a place I go to. I'll take you there if you promise to keep it a secret. Down the steep cinder hill, past the last houses on the estate, along the narrow lane now, lined with blackberry bushes that prick my finger and stain them deep purple with scrumpers dye in autumn. Past the hare field on the right, 1, 2, 3, bobbing up out of the long grass, golden brown in the sun, dark and grey in the shade. There's a little stepping stones brook here too, where I always dare to jump. Do you? Past the blind serpentine peeping bend that slows my bike once I learn to ride it, even more than the steep hill or slippery ice can. Then I'm here again, at the place where the old farm sits in guarding position. The other girls are dutifully indoors playing with dolls. My mother thinks I'm at Kay's, such a nice girl. But I'm here on my own, entering the deserted barn, my own dare. Musty and stinky and shuffling with rats and goodness knows what. I have to go though and check. My eyes adjusting to the dark now, careful where I tread amongst the fallen roof timbers and stone rubble. I look down and see the signs, pick up the clue. I'm a good detective. A cylindrical pellet of fur and bones, a trail laid just for me like gingerbread crumbs through the forest. I look up to the rafters, find the central beam and chink of light. There to the side on the stone plinth. Can you see? Ghost bird, Athena's bird, my football team's mascot, looking down at me again. Oh, those eyes. I must remember to breathe, but quiet. I step on a twig with a snap, and out she goes in a rush of air. No sound on those silent wings. A stealth pilot flying over the fields again, quartering as the leverets freeze in their scrapes, radar searching for mice and voles and shrews. This barn is my place, mine and hers. I dream that one day I will live here, on this plot, between owl and hare, field and brook. I still go there often in my mind, all these years later, visiting the ruins that is now a luxury barn conversion, fancy sports car parked outside, walled and gated within. but I am there whenever I close my eyes. I recall the smell, the whiteness of feathers, the piercing but patient gaze, the movement of there as she skimmed the top of my head, watching, waiting, rewarded with the sight in that forbidden secret time, all to myself, to dream, as I dream now, of how the world first was for me. Okay, I think that's wraps it up in bang on time, hasn't it? Are we okay? Well, thank you ever so much for coming, everybody, and I look forward to sharing some more of my poetry and writing and songs with you on the project, or you can look on my WordPress site and read about the other things that I've been doing. Okay. Right, Mandy.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jo. That was fabulous. I really do want to be out on those hills. I really do. I think you've inspired quite a few people today. And thank you everyone for coming and listening to Jo. I think it's been a really lovely Zoom and we've learnt a lot. So yeah, hope to see you on some more of Jo's sessions. And please, when I've put the video up on YouTube and on the Facebook page, please share your thoughts and comments. I'm sure Jo would love some feedback, but it's been great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mandy. Okay. Yeah.